So this week we are all about painting daisies, and I've taken photographs with these when I was out and about with my mobile phone, and I thought it would make a great subject. I've traced down my drawing like this. Now you can draw it freehand, but we're all about cracking on with the watercolour on this channel, and I provide you with reference photographs and line drawings, and I'll tell you how you can obtain them later. First of all, with this daisy, we're going to be applying our background washes, and for these colours I'm going to be using 3 from Daniel Smith: Undersea Green, Cascade Green and Moonglow. You can of course use whichever background colours that you want to, but because these had the really beautiful granulating effect, I decided to use these, and I'm just pointing out here the colours that I'm going to be using for the main section of the daisy, and I'll tell you in detail as we work through the tutorial the colours that I've chosen and why. The paper that I'm using today is a cold press 300 GSM, and I'm using a selection of brushes from this beautiful set that Etcher have sent me, and again I will be talking to you about them as I work through. This little palette is also from Etcher, and it comes in a pack of 2, as you can see here, in many different wells, and they are also ceramic so they don't stain. Clean glass of water, some kitchen paper, and we are good to go. The first colour I'm going to be mixing ready to apply to my wet wash is Undersea Green. This contains French Ultramarine and Quinacridone Gold. When the colours are applied wet in wet, you're left with this beautiful kind of granulating gold and green effect. It's just beautiful. But of course, as I said, you can use whichever background colours that you want to. Now I'm applying the water just where I want to drop the paint in. Once the water has settled onto the paper, I'm just dropping in Undersea Green like this. At the top of the paper, you'll notice that I didn't quite give the water a chance to sink in. I was a little bit impatient, so make sure that you don't have your water glistening on your paper. This is a 300 GSM cold press paper from a sketchbook from Etcher, and I find that with a cold press which is textured, you have that beautiful kind of granulating effect with these colours. So just apply the water where you want to drop the paint. Using my number 12 round brush to do this. Now the other 2 colours that I'm using are Cascade, which is a mix of phthalo blue and raw sienna, which separates into this beautiful bluey greeny effect with a little bit of gold in there as well. And Moonglow, of course, everybody loves Moonglow by Daniel Smith. Complex violet hue with green and red, and it separates out into these beautiful glorious colours. Now I'm just randomly dropping in the colours here, not paying any attention. You can see from the reference photograph I've completely changed the background. I've taped off the outside, as you can see, with some low tack masking tape, just to make application a little bit easier, and I'm just randomly dropping in the colours, as you can see. I've switched down to a number 3 brush as that paint is settling into the paper. I'm just gently pushing that pigment right up to the edges of the petals, as you can see, just to give them a little bit more definition, but we can worry about that later. It's all about just getting that first wash on and making sure that this background colour is completely dry before we do the rest of the painting. Now we do provide you with free trace down drawings and reference photographs for all of our tutorials here on YouTube, and you can obtain them a couple of ways. First of all, you can join our Facebook group where we have all of our reference photographs and traceables for our YouTube channel, and I'll put the link in the description box underneath this video. But not only that, you can also post your finished paintings and have some feedback from me and our other fantastic members. But don't worry if you're not on Facebook, because I'll also be putting them up right at the end of this video so that you can screenshot them and print them out that way. Now that we've applied our first layer, I'm just dropping in that beautiful Undersea Green just to add a little bit of depth of colour here and there. No rhyme or reason here, I'm just dropping the colours in where I want to, dropping in a mixture of Undersea Green, Cascade Green and Moonglow. Notice how the colours are separating in my palette. So everything's completely dry and I'm just using my number 2 flat synthetic brush. This one's from Rosemary Co, and when I'm using it damp, by dipping it into the water, patting it dry on my kitchen paper, I can just gently soften out those hard edges, because when watercolour dries you get this kind of hard kind of tide mark, which I don't like. So I'm just using the brush to blur those together. Now at this point it looks a little bit untidy, but don't worry, it's all part of the watercolour process, and if you're new to watercolour, I highly recommend that you watch this video all the way through so that you can see that tricky process unfold. This is my number 1 size round. This again is from Etcher. Etcher sent me these brushes to try out and I absolutely love them. I always use synthetic brushes these days simply because I prefer them, and you can see how I'm using this brush just to tidy up some of the edges. These brushes have really fine points and just mean that I can get into the little nooks and crannies of the textured cold pressed paper. I recommend that you use a cold press 100% cotton paper for this tutorial, because you will get that beautiful granular effect. If you're using a hot press, it will be a little less obvious. The granulation looks much better on a textured surface. So now that the background wash is dry, I'm removing my masking tape here, and it has seeped a little bit onto the watercolour paper, but I'll remove that in a moment just by using a magic eraser sponge. Gently peeling it off like this and using a damp magic eraser just to remove any sort of bits where it's seeped onto the edge there. This low tuck masking tape is absolutely amazing, and I will link it in the description box along with all the other materials I'm using. So this set here is from Marie Blue, and I'm using cadmium yellow medium to mix up my greens. So we have cadmium yellow medium and cobalt blue light, and I'm mixing these in different values. One has slightly more yellow than blue and vice versa. Don't be too fussy here with your greens. We just want it to be a green tone. This isn't a botanical painting. It's just about having fun with watercolour and creating a beautiful piece of art. So just to recap, we have cadmium yellow pale with cobalt blue light in various values and various ratios, and you can see how I'm just using my number 3 size round here to switch around these colours and apply to the back of the daisy. I decided to paint this daisy from a slightly different angle because I really loved the way it seemed to be sitting in the light and dancing, and I really love the way that it's from a slightly different angle. So I work from photographs, and I usually take them when I'm out and about with my mobile phone. The cameras on iPhones these days are incredible, and I was able to get some really good close-up shots of this daisy that we can paint today. But I'm always worried about dropping my phone. This ring holder takes away the stress. This gorgeous case is from Berger, so let's just take a closer look.
If I can't have you, I don't want you to have anyone. And if you don't want me, there's something wrong with them, right? Maybe I got problems that I don't tell anyone. Have I lost my perception? Feel like I wanna do something wrong now. Packing all your belongings. Say you wanna take some time, but if you say we'll meet again, why'd you have to take everything now? Baby, are you lying? Have you met someone? Tell me now. I better start crying, make them feel bad before we leave town. 10, 9, counting down, putting on a smile.
So if you'd like to treat yourself to one of the most beautiful and protective phone cases, then head over to their website and get a 15% discount with my code, which I will link in the description box underneath this video. First layer is dry. I'm just applying the darker value at the top and the more yellowy colour on the bottom. So as I said earlier on, just mix up your greens in whatever ratio that you want to. We're all about just having fun with paint today and just getting the paint onto the paper. So as you know, watercolour is all about building up your layers. So we want these to have that really translucent look. So I'm not being too fussy here, just adding more blue and more yellow where I feel necessary. And it's a great way of practicing to mix up your greens at the same time. I'm just dropping in a tiny bit of the yellow colour here. I did add a tiny bit of Imperial Red just to give it that little bit more of an orangey tone. So if you've got something like an Indian yellow, you can use that, or just apply the yellow if you want to. I'm putting a tiny bit of the yellow colour onto the petals because I could see an element of that yellow tone there. And now that the underside of the flower is dry, I'm just adding some of the darker value. This is the mix of the cobalt blue light and cadmium yellow medium, and I'm just dropping it in here and there, leaving out some of the lighter areas as I work through. Now that everything's dry, I'm just using the darker value to add a little bit of detail like this, using my fine brush here. This is a number 3 round, working through bit by bit. I decided in the end to add a little bit more of the green, darker green value at the bottom there. If you are enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to our channel where every Tuesday we upload new content, and if you hit that bell notification you'll be notified so that you won't miss anything. And if you are enjoying it, please show me some love and give it a big thumbs up. It's a way of letting YouTube know that you're enjoying my content, and it helps me more than you know. This painting isn't botanical, but if botanical painting is your thing, we do have a Patreon where every month we create brand new content in more detail so that you can create botanical pieces. Let's just take a look. I just want to take a moment to tell you about our Patreon, which at the time of filming has 4 different membership levels, from mini weekly videos of doodles, vlogs and podcasts to full-length botanical painting tutorials, which are exclusive to Patreon and are of course ad-free. If this is something that interests you, I've put a link in the description below, plus it's a way for you to support my channel. We are also on Instagram at The Wonders of Watercolour, where we try to post up daily. So if you are on Instagram, do consider joining us there also. So everything's dry, so let's just take a look at the petals on the daisy. I'm mixing cobalt blue light and a little bit of neutral tint there in different ratios, and I've also mixed the 2 colours together. If you don't have these colours, don't worry, you could use a really light colour wash of black or a Payne's grey, but just watered them down. You just want these petals to look as if they've got some value and they are not completely white. So like I said, I'm not being too fussy here, just applying these colours to add a little bit of detail here and there, just to give that illusion of these petals not being flat. And again, watercolour is all about building up your layers. The important thing to remember is when you're working with watercolour to go in lightly and slowly. So just working through petal by petal, completing the process and working through one by one. All of the materials that I'll be using today, I will link in the description box underneath this video if you want to take a look. But as I said at the start of this video, don't worry about having the exact colours. Use whichever that you have within your own set. I'm now mixing Cerulean Violet. This is by Winsor & Newton, making sure that everything's dry and using my fine brush to go through the underside of the daisy like this. So we're going to be using the Cerulean Violet. I was going to consider using a graphic pen, like a fine line pen, to do this, but because they've got that kind of purpley burgundy tone, I'm going to be using the mixture of Cerulean Violet. Notice that the paint at this point is a little bit thicker in my palette. Gently outlining each of these in turn, and I'm just adding a tiny bit of the Cerulean Violet in between each of these segments and using my brush to blend the colour through like this. Make sure that your brush is damp, so you'll rinse your brush in the water, pat it on your kitchen paper first, as I'm doing here, and blending it through. If you're wondering why I'm using the puddle in the middle of my palette and not my jar to do this, if I were to use my water in my jar, your brush can become flooded with water, so that's why I'm using my little puddle of water on my palette there. So working through one by one, you need a tiny bit of patience for this. Just outlining them one by one. You can really take your time with watercolour. It's something that doesn't need to be rushed. You can see that I've mixed the neutral tint in my other palette here. I've run out of some space and I'm just going over the initial washes with the darker values, as you can see here. Like I said, don't worry about the colours that you're applying. You could even use something like a really light ivory black or a Payne's grey to do this. The thing is, just get the paint onto the paper and have fun with it. Just adding a little bit of water here to my 3 puddles of neutral tint and just building up the colours on each of the petals, and I will work through them one by one, as you can see, just gently applying the colour and blending it through, using our initial wash as a guide, and I will continue this process on all of the other petals. Now that everything's dry, I've mixed up the same washes as I did at the very beginning. I'm using wet on wet again to outline the petals of the daisy. Now we need to just give that colour a little bit of a boost. So drop in your water where you want to put that paint and use the initial washes that you did at the very start. So working that paint right up against the petals to give them a really defined look. By doing this, you get rid of any untidy edges. make that flower really sort of pop off the page. I'm using wet on this section, but you can of course apply this colour wet on dry, which means that you can apply your paint directly onto the paper. But because I wanted some of the elements to have that soft blur, I'm working wet in wet for this section, dropping in a mixture of the Cascade Green and Undersea Green here. I've got Undersea Green and Undersea Green mixed with Cascade in the middle, and Cascade on the top and Undersea Green on the bottom section there. But like I said, use whichever colours that you want to. By applying the darker values around each petal, you can see how already it's making a difference and making that daisy really jump off the page and giving it a little bit more definition here and there. So wet on wet, dropping in that colour on this section here. And pushing that paint right up to the pencil line where we have our white petals. Gently working it around and manipulating that paint and pushing it into the petals like this. On this section here, I decided to work wet on dry, applying the paint directly onto the dry paper just to give it a little bit more definition here and there. I'm using a damp brush to blend it into the paper so that that outside edge blends into that beautiful background that we've applied. You don't want to have any hard edges on the outside section because we want this background to look really soft and beautiful. So working through bit by bit, mixing up the colours as you go through, because while making up this background, you really can't go wrong with the colours, but just make sure that you're making these little petals defined as you work through. So I'm working through each petal in turn. I put a little bit of water on this one first of all, so we have that little blur. It's entirely up to you whether you work wet in wet or wet and dry for this section. It's whatever works for you. You could even do both as I'm doing here, just to practice your application techniques. Just working around each of these petals to give them that definition and really tidy up any untidy edges. And you can see already this has made a huge difference to the painting, but just make sure that you remember to blur out your outside edges so you don't lose that really soft, romantic look of the background. These brushes that I'm using today from Etcher are really super lightweight. They have a beautiful fine point and they are just a joy to use. As I said earlier on, I will link everything that I'm using today in the description box underneath this video if you'd like to take a look. So Cascade Green and Undersea Green being used here. Cascade Green is a really magical colour and I've used it in a couple of my tutorials. When you apply it, it just looks like any other kind of bluey green tone. Once it separates into the paper, you can see it has these beautiful kind of gold sort of flecks, and it looks just, it's one of my favourite colours, and I really recommend that you take a look at it and check it out for yourself. Just a stunning colour. I absolutely love Daniel Smith paints. I'm using this now just to outline some of the petals to give them a little bit more definition. And once again, working down the stem, applying this time a little bit of the Undersea Green when it is dry. Just mixing up a little bit more Undersea Green just to add a bit of definition. Just adding a little bit of texture to the central stem here. Working down these little veins using the tip of my number 1 size brush. Just working all the way down that stem. Just carrying on the process and brightening up that background, just section by section, cleaning my brush, patting it dry and blending it through. Everything's completely dry, so now we can take a look at the little fine hairs on the stem of the daisy. There's a couple of things we're going to do before this. These are some graphic pens that Etcher have very kindly sent me, and I'm going to be using, well, I start off with a 0.1 and then I go down to a 0.5 here, and I'm going to use this to outline the petals like this. Of course, you don't have to do this, but it just gives it that really sort of special feel, and you can add a little bit more definition to each of the petals. Notice how I'm using the pen to kind of outline the petals and also the veins that I've painted within the petals themselves. I'll work through each petal in turn, and you can see how I'm using the pen to outline the values that I've put on the petals, just to enhance them and give them a little bit of a boost. Making those little negative spaces stand out like this. Just work through petal by petal. This really tightens up the edges and makes them stand out as well. So like I said, you haven't got to do this, but I felt that it really added something to the painting. I'm now using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. If you haven't got this, don't worry, you could use a white gouache, or you could use just any white paint that you have within your kit. I'm using my number 0, this is a number 0 round, this is from Tintoretto, but actually it's more like a fine liner brush, but you can use any brush that has a fine point, and I'm just painting in the hairs like this. Just sort of randomly using this sort of flicky motion and just dotting them in where I feel they are needed. Again, you haven't really got to do this, but if you have got any white paint in your palette, then consider doing this just to give it a little bit of an extra boost. If you are using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, just add a tiny bit of water just to get it moving a little bit. And you can see that I'm adding a tiny bit of this to some of the negative spaces within the petals. You don't have to do this, but it just gives it a little bit of a boost if you've lost any of your negative spaces. Just work through and add those white areas where you feel they are needed. Everything's dry, and I decided that I was going to add some gold paint from my Etcher palette here. So these are a beautiful selection of paints. They have all kinds of gold, a really kind of dense colour. So I'm just using this to outline my painting like this. You can see how they separate on the palettes. And this is quite a thick mix of paint, and I'm using my number 1 brush from Etcher just to outline it like this. The lines don't have to be particularly straight, but I just felt it gave it the edge. And once again, I will link these in the description box underneath this video, but use any gold paint that you have, or you could outline it with any colour that you wanted to. So we're nearly done with this painting. Remember to stay right until the end, where I'll put up the line drawing and reference photograph for you to print off and join in with this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.